Hey everyone, good afternoon. Welcome back to the Agile Scotland Conference final day. My name is Kevin Austin, I'm one of the organisers. In the next session, I've got the privilege of introducing not just one, but two speakers. So Sara Meil is a driven product manager with a depth of experience in scaling mobile apps, e-commerce sites and SaaS platforms. She's passionate about driving user value and success metrics alongside just creating and building great teams to work with. In her spare time, she likes cycling, horse riding, traveling and painting. And our next speaker is currently Director of Product at JP Morgan's Global Infrastructure. I will turn off my notifications. Is currently Director of, our other speaker is currently Director of Product at JP Morgan's Global Infrastructure. And she is working to bring product depth and product tooling to a captive audience of tens of thousands. Her experience is working within worked previously with Skyscanner in 2013, and she joined their journey to become Scotland's tech unicorn and beyond. She's formerly growth director and at the loyalty startup Swipey. She is an absolute joy to work with, a keen triathlete and runner, wife and mum of two, and she is also a fellow Zwifter as well. So I introduce Janet Balneaves. So over to you, Sara and Janet.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining today. So like I said, we're running this talk today. It's going to be Sara and I going through around metrics that matter. But we're all a bit zoomed out and a bit kind of Zoom fatigue a little bit, so we're going to make this interactive. So if any of you have used the tool menti.com before, that's great. Just hop on, and the code's down there, 901963.8. For those of you who haven't, it's a little tool where you can vote, ask some questions, and when you put your answers in, they're going to come up in a nice interactive metric kind of driven way on our slides as we're talking. So it's quite handy if you're on a laptop or something, you can just bring up Menti on your phone. It works quite well on there. It's really optimized for mobile, and it lets us be a bit more interactive in the session. So wherever in the world that you are, thank you for joining us today. If anyone's got homeschoolers or little children home with them as well, hello to you too, and thank you for joining. Mine have kind of been home a few times as well, but they didn't want to come and join today. So it's just me and Sara. So just that code again, so 901963.8. If you join onto that with Menti, and we'll get started and start going through the slides that we've got for you today. So as I say, it's myself and Sara presenting today. We're going to talk a little bit more about ourselves and our background. And while we're doing that, there is a nice slide on Menti that I'm going to ask each of you to tell us what's your role, what's the project that you work on, and where in the world are you today. So while we're talking a little bit about ourselves, we'll get to learn a little bit about you as well. So Sara, over to you and give us a little bit more introduction about yourself to build on what Kevin told us.
So I'm Sara. I currently work as a product manager at Ocado, so at Ocado Technology. So we're basically building software for supermarkets around the world. So we currently have customers in Japan, America, France, and we basically are replicating the software we built for ourselves for other retailers globally. So we have hundreds of thousands of users across the world daily using our various platforms. I'm responsible for the browse feature, so anything on the e-commerce site which enables you to browse the website. So as you're shopping for your weekly shop, I look after that part of the platform and anything up until the checkout point. So we're optimizing for a number of items in the basket value, and regularity of shops as well. My background is in marketing originally, and I also started out as an audit associate at PwC initially when I first graduated. So I've quite a varied career so far. What about yourself, Janet?
So I started out life as a computer science. I got a computer science degree, so I was a software engineer for about 10 years, working in large American companies such as Cisco, JP Morgan, General Electric, etc., with a little startup mixed in. Over the years, I've got a real passion to kind of understand and connect the impact and the outcomes of the work that are being done. So over the years, moved into product management to kind of really be in that space. So not just that I can connect what I'm doing with impact, but the teams that I'm working with, we've got a real good, strong connection with what we're doing. So things moved into the agile space in the last sort of 10, 15 years. It's been possible to connect much closer to that. I'm just loving how Glasgow's shining through in the middle there. That's nice to kind of see. So in the last 10 years, moved into the product space, and as Kevin said, worked in Skyscanner, which gave me a fantastic opportunity to kind of understand kind of in more depth how product works, etc. And then the last couple of years, I worked in a startup in Glasgow with a loyalty cashback app. And now I'm in JP Morgan, which the scale of JP Morgan is kind of, you don't really stop and think about it until you're there. But in technology, there's 50,000 people, there's 250,000 employees. So when we're just building an internal tool, and sometimes that can be for 250,000 people, which is bigger than the target market of many kind of external businesses, etc. So the scale of JP Morgan is terrifying when you stop and think about it, but the opportunity and the effect that product can have, even internal product, is massive at JP Morgan. So Sarah and I work together at Swipey and have a keen passion together around metrics and product. And so we're going to talk you through some of that today. It's interesting to see we've got here Glasgow, Edinburgh, product owners, engineers, and a whole variety of different roles today. So thank you all for joining us. So before I talk about product metrics and kind of metrics, I want to kind of contextualize things. I'm a big kind of advocate of having the context. So I'm going to start with, you need outputs first, but often outputs get confused with a goal. Companies are very good at measuring outputs. So things, are you going to be on time, on budget? How many things have we built? How many Jira tickets have gone through? And it's not that they're bad metrics, but sometimes and often sometimes they become the goal, and that's when they become bad. If I ask you about a product you love, do you ever say, I love that product because it was delivered on time, on budget, or on scope? Probably not. But it's not that we shouldn't measure these, we should, but we should just watch out that they don't become the goal. What we really need to think about is the outcomes and the behaviors that we're looking to drive. So if we take the bread analogy that we started with here, it's not really about the bread, it's about someone eating that sandwich, about them kind of satisfying their hunger. Was it a lunchtime opportunity, or was it something for dinner? And how do we measure the value that we bring from that? It's a harder thing to think about, and often is a gap in many businesses today. So that's what I want to focus on today, is the outcomes. But we mustn't forget that we all are in business, and ultimately it does come back down to revenue. We want to have a viable business at the end of the day, or it's not sustainable. We can't ignore that. But if all you do is measure the outputs and the revenue, by the time you notice your revenue isn't where you thought it would be, it's a bit late, and you don't really have actions or insight into why it's happened or what to do next. So you become a bit stuck. So it's this piece in the middle that we really want to focus on today. So thinking about outputs, outcomes, and impacts, and really making sure you don't have this gap in the middle, which is the harder space to play in. And it's really all about this small world called value. It's a really small, innocuous word, and it's easy to say, and I hear it come up a lot. But how do you measure value? What does value really mean? It's something that we don't spend that much time thinking about. And it's quite a hard question to answer. It's almost like when you're in a job interview and someone says, where do you want to be in 10 years' time? And you're like, oh, that's a big, broad question. It's the same with value. What's the value that your product brings? It's quite a broad question to answer. So today I want to talk about some frameworks and tools to help you think about that question and help you think about what the answer might be for your product over time. So why have product metrics at all? As I say, it's about our people getting value, but it's not just about that. It's about you and your teams thinking about where to focus next, what to build next, what problem to solve, and having people come along with you. If you and your team understand the problem and the opportunity, then it's a far easier discussion for you to move forward. And actually, if you all understand how to look at the opportunity and the value, as a team, you can spot opportunity as well, and not just wait for it to be the product manager or that one person in your team. But I can hear you all already groaning, oh, we've got so many metrics already, we don't need any more, I can't cope with this, I've got to think about how reliable my system is, the availability of it, is it up and running, what's the health, how often are we delivering, how quickly can we get features live? We've got all of these things. And it's not to say that we shouldn't have them, but we need to think about the whole. Product is the sum of the parts, it's really the sum of all the metrics, and there are a lot of metrics. But thinking about them kind of in the operational sense and the product sense, there's no point measuring value if your system's not up and running and not available. It doesn't take a genius to know that if your system's not online and not available, no one can get value anyway. So you do need the two, but it's thinking about it in a more all-encompassing way. if you think about flying an aeroplane, which I have actually done once, it's quite overwhelming. There's a lot of things to look at, but you don't try and look at all the metrics all at the time. There's different places that you focus for different things that you're doing. When you're taking off or taking a landing, you'll be looking at one set of metrics. When you're flying above the clouds, it's a different set. And then there's ones you don't look at very often, but there's alarms and alerts that will focus your attention to go and look at them when there's a problem. So it's the same with product. You need to kind of have the broad view, but you're not going to be looking at them all the time because it's really quite overwhelming. So you need mental models to help you distill where to focus and where to look. I'm liking my two halves of a whole analogy a bit today. So product metrics are two halves. So there's the quantum, the quantitative and qualitative, which I struggle to say. We're going to focus mostly on the quant today. So that's about what's happening. It's about charts. It's about metrics. It's about spreadsheets, and it helps you know that there is a problem. On the qual side, that's about kind of why is that happening, where to focus, who to speak to, and how to understand what's going on. It's not one or the other, but it's both. And also the data side, having metrics doesn't mean you have all, you'll know everything. There'll be gaps in that as well. There'll be things that you've not thought to measure and you won't know about that. So don't fall into the trap of thinking because I'm measuring lots of things, I have all the insights, because I can guarantee there'll be things we forget. So in Swipey Sara, remember we had this really good example of the quant and the qual coming together. We had this really great news feed that we put, not news feed, a deals feed that we put live. And so we had all these deals listed and it was great. We had metrics to show us that people were coming in to view the deals feed. But no one was clicking the button. No one was really, you had to click on a specific deal and you could click a button to redeem the deal. And I'm like, but it's so obvious, why is it not happening? And the metrics showed us that literally nobody was clicking on that button. So then we had to go to the qual side, we had to understand why. In our rush and excitement to get our great idea out there, we hadn't really spent the time that we should have speaking to users before building a thing. So when we started to observe them, we would give them the app and they would just scroll through up and down, and they literally were blind to the button. And then we stopped and kind of pointed it out, then we kind of realized a white button on a white background, not very obvious. And so we tried making it orange and that made all the difference to the data. But it was the blend of the two things that came to the conclusion. The quantitative told us there was a problem, but we had to then go and spend time digging into that. But it gave us a much more focused question to go and ask our users to understand what was going on. And as soon as you optimize for one thing, you'll be optimized for another. So we decide to have a goal about finding bugs. We'll get $10 for every bug that we find and fix. It'll be amazing how many bugs suddenly appear in your software that didn't exist before. So be careful what you're optimizing for and have balancing metrics, etc. As human beings, we will consciously and unconsciously go and game a metric. It's not always malicious, and quite often it just isn't malicious. Just if that's what you're incentivized to do, that's what you'll go and do. And then we have our favorite. My favorite is vanity metrics. It's those ones that make you feel good about yourself. They don't really give you action of what you're going to do next. And once you start to understand these, you'll see them in a lot of places. They're typically quite often when a company talks about itself in the papers or the news, they use the vanity metric because that's what people like. It makes them look really good. And it's not really the metric that they're using internally. If I think we're talking about Zwift at the start or Strava, when you get kudos for doing your ride or you get a ride on, it makes you feel really good about yourself. But having 105 ride-ons or kudos doesn't really kind of help you become a better runner, I would say. So I want to focus more on actionable metrics, the things that can go up and go down, not things that you're counting. So like your conversion rate, that can go up and can go down. Whereas if you're counting total number of subscribers ever, that's just going to keep going up and it just makes you feel good about yourself. It doesn't really give you any action. You'll see these types of metrics everywhere. And some of you will probably be thinking, I know some of these things that Janet's talking about. So Sara and I are going to chat a little bit about ones that Sara's seen and I've seen, while you can kind of share what the vanity metrics that you've seen while you've been working in product, etc. So Sara, what's the best example that you've seen of a vanity metric?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to use an example that I used myself. So I used to measure my success when I worked at Arnold Clark on one of the homepage banners. I used to measure success by click-through rate. So if I had increased my click-through rate, then I would deem that as successful, which really what I was doing is I was creating banners with my team to create clickbait. Basically, that's what we were creating. So it wasn't adding any value to the user. The bounce rate was high on the page that we were taking them to. It wasn't a good experience for the user. And ultimately, we weren't leading to an increase in inquiries, which was our metric, or car sales ultimately. So I was creating these banners thinking they were great because people were clicking on them and getting good, click-through rate, when reality there wasn't adding any value, and it probably was devaluing the user's experience because they're clicking on something that they might not necessarily have wanted to click on. So yeah, that's my example. What about you, Janet?
I think I'm going to stick with Strava, the whole kudos thing of Strava, because it's funny because Strava they feed on people's need and desire for those kind of vanity metrics in a way. So kind of getting those. So sometimes you maybe do, like I've seen people recently now doing Strava art runs. I don't know if it's kind of going to make them a better runner, but they get a lot of kudos for it. So it's kind of interesting, some of the reindeer runs that I've seen people do, or the Santa shaped runs, etc. over the last few weeks.
It does make you feel good when you get lots of kudos on your ones though.
Lines of code written. Oh god, no, I've not heard that one for a while, but yeah, that's one that I've seen in the past as well. Actually, one of the most successful sprints me and a team had was because we deleted hundreds of lines of code and made it easier for people to navigate the code base. So we didn't write any code. Number of tests completed. Nice. So really what we want to do is understand our users, and this is where some frameworks come in. So this is quite a simple one. We're going to think about 4 different groupings of people. We've got Sara and her clickbait acquiring some new users in the acquisition piece over here. And then we get our new users, then we get our current users, we get resurrected users. So those are people who used us, stopped using us, but have come back. And then we have the dead zone, the red zone down here, people who have used us and then gone, no, this isn't for me, and stopped using you. And even just starting to think about your users in this kind of sense, and to start to kind of really start to unpack and give you layers and questions and places to focus. If you think, I was going to try and not use the C word, but we're going to have to use the C word. So if we think about COVID, if you think about Uber, for example, Uber was very much focusing on new users and making them current users, getting people to probably have like one taxi ride every week, etc. Now that COVID's hit, they've probably got a lot of people that have churned and a lot of people that they're going to have to resurrect, because the nature and the colouring of all their users will have changed in the last couple of months through nothing of their own doing, external factors. So they're going to have to really kind of change their strategy in terms of what they're doing. Whereas Okado's probably, on the other hand, the other way around, and Zoom, for instance, they've probably got a whole pile of people just coming through here without them having to really do anything. And even the people who had churned had started coming back due to COVID. So external factors are quite fascinating in the last year in terms of how they're coming into play and making changes to what's happening in your ecosystem. And which is interesting, because if you don't really kind of look at it through that lens, you could take the win for, oh, look, we've delivered these new features and it's had such a great impact, but how do you really know what you delivered was that had that impact, or was it an external factor? So it's starting to kind of look through this lens. This is a nice chart from a company called Amplitude, who do analytics tracking, and they've got a great content site as well. So let's take a little example. This is look at my awesome product, and we're growing really well. I'm going to give myself a great pat on the back because everyone likes a hockey stick and this looks really awesome. So I've done a great job here with me and my team. Look at me. Let's break it down by new and current resurrected users. This is where it starts becoming interesting. So this blue bit, I really want to be growing my current users, people coming back and using me again because they see value. This isn't really growing, it's kind of quite static. Then we've got this big green bit down here. I wonder if Sarah's been with her click-through rates again, bringing in new users. But what this is showing me, I'm getting more and more new users in, but this isn't really growing, so they're not really staying around. And I'm resurrecting some, which is kind of interesting. And then if I go and look at what's happening with people who've come and used me and not come back, it's growing every month. So this isn't going to carry it. This is not sustainable over the long term. And if we've been paying for traffic through digital ads, and even if we're not been paying, it's people's time and effort on SEO pages to acquire these users, they're kind of hemorrhaging out. So what is it that's happening? Why are they not staying around? So you can see already, just by breaking it down into these 4 colours and 4 groupings, you've got much more actionable things to do, or questions to ask, or sets of users to go and identify with to find out what's going on with your product, versus the lovely blue chart, which is one that you would probably see on a PR site for an external comms of look how much we're growing. But really, you need to really understand this to kind of really be getting the most out of your product. So when we're talking here, we're talking about an active user, and this comes back to the value piece. So when we talk about active, what does that really mean? Because if you don't understand that and define that, you can't think about things through here. So I'm going to think about it in terms of games. So I'm going to go back to Amplitude again. They've been through 11,000 products, and they assert that out of 11,000 products, there's 3 buckets that you can be playing in 3 games. And that's the attention game, transaction game, and productivity game. The attention game, no prizes for guessing there, would be the likes of Facebook and Instagram, all those things that you know you're trying to do less of, probably make New Year's resolutions to kind of delete them and spend less time in them, but you kind of still end up back in there again. Those are then the attention game, clearance then. Transaction game, the likes of your Ocado, e-commerce sites, or your old friend Amazon, for instance. And then the productivity game, this is the one where I debated, do I put Jira in here or not? I don't really know. Well, we'll leave that open to debate. But the likes of Trello, Salesforce, HubSpot, even Slack, I think, is it a productivity or not? I'll leave that open to debate. But by starting to thinking about your product and which space that it plays in, it helps you start to think about, well, what products am I kind of similar to? It helps you start to think about the types of metrics that would define your value. So have a think about your product and where you're working in just now. We'll ask you a question at the end, but here's some examples, like say Netflix and Facebook. Netflix is interesting because it's not just how many people, but it's about thinking about how much content they're watching. All of us, I'm sure, are guilty of watching way more content than we used to. And it was interesting, I started watching something on Sky, and I had to watch one thing, 1 hour, once a week, for the last 6 weeks. I can't remember the last time I watched a show in that old school type of manner. And then you've got Amazon and your Walmarts, and then you've got your productivity. So it gives you examples of the types of metrics that they'll be measuring in these spaces. So have a think about your product and what game you're playing. And there is a none bucket there if you don't think you fit in any, but have a think about what you're working on just now and fill in what space that you think you're playing in. So Sarah, what product are you kind of most liking just now through lockdown, and what game are they kind of playing with you, if you like?
I have to go for Netflix. They definitely caught my attention in the attention bucket. And I think they're definitely trying to optimize. I'm assuming they will have different cohorts of users. So they'll have users like me that maybe watch a couple of hours a night, but then they'll have users that binge watch series day in, day out, potentially if you're on furlough or something like that. So I think, and then you also have the users that maybe only watch one series and may just follow that, and that they're still valuable because they're still a subscriber. They're just using the product in a different way, and they still caught that user's attention. They've just caught their attention in a different way. So I think number of hours watched, but regularity of watching, and basically, yeah, how they've caught their attention, and ultimately they'd be looking for subscribers because I guess that's how they make their money. What about you, Janet?
But before I go into mine, with Netflix, you don't realize how personalized the content is until you log into Netflix as somebody else. So we were staying in an Airbnb and it had Netflix, but the person who was there before us had left their login in. So I went in as this person, and it was so different from what I see and what I experience every day. It's not until I did that I really, really understood just how personalized Netflix is, because you're just in a wee echo chamber seeing what's there. You just assume that's kind of similar to what everyone else sees, but no, this person liked horror. So it was a very different experience in Netflix than my family-friendly movies. So mine, I was going to say, so I've been kind of trying it like Gusto and HelloFresh, etc. So I kind of use them, and it's the productivity because it helps me get things done faster. But then I kind of use it for a bit, and then I go, oh, I feel guilty about there's so much packaging. I could actually do this myself. Why am I not just doing this stuff? And then I stop. And then they're very good at going, oh, Janet, we've not seen you for a while. Here's some money off. And they phone you up and they give you some money off. And then I go, oh, okay, I'll try it again. And then recently with my son, who's 10, I'm thinking, actually, if I go back to use it again, he can choose the menu so that he can stop complaining about what he doesn't like for dinner, because he's had to choose the menu that gets delivered. So I'm going to try that next. So it's interesting, no one said none. So the test of the 3 buckets is still holding true. We've only got 3 in the attention game. I wonder what they are. It's kind of interesting. Mostly transactional and productivity. Oh. So let's go back to, so now you know what your value is. So it's things like how many films I've watched, how much music I've listened to, how many podcasts I've listened to. You have to think about how your users get there and start to kind of break this down a little bit so you can start to think about it. And it's not just where people are in the cycle, but it's about time to get through that. Time is very precious, and attention is very kind of hard to get from people. So the longer it takes you to get someone from using your product the first time to a habit, the less likely they are to kind of get there. So you need to think about kind of timing that, making it easy, making it frictionless, to get them through that as well. So we can break it down a little bit more and think about, this comes from a really great website called reforge.com. So this comes from here. So you think about, well, your users got to sign up. If you're an app, they'll have to download the app. Then they'll have to do some setup. Quite often you're asked for an email address, etc. And then it's not until they use it for the first time that you get that real aha. So the first time I get my delivery from HelloFresh, the first time I do my Zwift, the first time I get my shopping from Ocado, is that aha, I get value. The time from here to here can be quite a long time, depending on the nature of your product. So you really have to kind of really nurture people from here to here to make sure they kind of get through. And then once they've done it once, then thinking about how they do it more frequently. And it might not be, it's not necessarily daily, not necessarily weekly, it might be monthly. You need to think about what the natural frequency is for that. Like HelloFresh, you're not going to be on there daily because you tend to order like a weekly meal, etc. And somewhere like Facebook, it's probably optimizing for hourly habits there. And then you can start to think about who the different users. You'll have people that use you way more than anybody else, like power, core, and casual users. Casual users are not better or worse than power users, they're just different, and the nature of what they're looking for might differ. And starting to understand those needs and focus on kind of if you want to kind of be moving people from casual to core, etc. So it's maybe around, if we take Uber for an example, maybe they're casual users because there's not enough drivers in your area, and to kind of move them into core, you maybe need to add more drivers, or it's maybe about more supermarkets, or maybe about more content, etc. So understanding where you're wanting to focus. And then you've got all the traps on the way of the places that people can fall and not make it to the end and become kind of either they never get value from the product, or they got value once and they didn't come back again. Starting to understand where those spaces are and kind of thinking about that. So just start to break that down and think about where people are in that flow, etc. So what the frameworks also give you, it gives you comparisons of products, because like I said, value is different for different products. You shouldn't really compare products. Like you can't really compare Amazon to Spotify, etc. But you can think about them in the similar frameworks and have conversations as teams that are quite aligned and use the same language. So on the left, you've got product one, and they've got a lot of people that have signed up, but they're not getting through to kind of setting up or kind of getting value from the product. So they're going to be focusing on why are people kind of signing up and not going any further. Whereas down here, a lot of people have used them once and got value, but they're not getting repeat users, so they're focusing on a different problem. But having the same framework allows you to kind of have that really good conversation with your teams and come together to help kind of work with each other, rather than talking completely two different languages. So I'm going to step through an example of Zoom, and I think this is another fascinating one, because this example was crafted only a year ago, and as you'll go through it, you'll see things have changed quite substantially again. So if you think about Zoom, they're looking here for salespeople who tend to be on the road, typically on the phone, meeting people in person, who are starting to want to use something like Zoom video conferencing to do one meeting a week to kind of save their time on the road. So this is who they're focusing on, and they'll have done kind of the work to kind of understand the people, what their needs are and what they're focusing on. The frequency is weekly, focusing on doing weekly calls. I was like, I wish we could all go back to the day where we don't do Zoom every day for everything. And so when you think about Zoom, they're set up. So someone has downloaded Zoom and scheduled their first meeting. And they've got scheduled the first meeting within 7 days, because they're thinking here that the frequency is weekly. So if they were trying to get people to schedule their first meeting within hours, it's not really going to make sense, because these people are going to just be using it once a week. But if you said schedule the first meeting within 6 months, the likelihood of them that happening, because so many things will happen between now and 6 months time. So they're looking at people getting that meeting in the first 7 days. So the aha moment for Zoom would be getting people to complete the first great meeting, but not just completing the first meeting. They've got, with great video and audio quality, for those of us who can remember the first time we used Zoom all those goodness knows how long ago, it tends to ask you how you rated that meeting. So they're looking for a 4-star rating. So it's not just that you've done something, it's also they're looking for that quality feedback, that you got value from it and it was a good call as well. And then the habit moment is using Zoom for all my remote meetings. Oh, how all my meetings would be 4 meetings in 28 days. So it probably changed a lot now to kind of be daily kind of frequency. But again, they're looking for people doing the meetings, getting value from them, and thinking about where they are in that cycle. So they might find they've got problems with people getting set up, but then not getting to their meetings and not getting value. And it gives them that kind of focus as a team where to kind of move and focus on. So if you spend time as a team going through all the metrics and understanding them, there's these questions. And if you've got metrics and you can't answer yes to these questions, there's a bit of a sign that they're probably not very helpful and you should go back to the drawing board. So do they help you understand their users? Do they give you a way to tie what you're doing back to measurable outcomes? Do the metrics help you understand where you should be focusing your time and efforts? And do they help you as a team kind of have a conversation about where to go and what to do next? And if your answer is yes to those, I think you're in a good space and it'll help you and the team move together faster. So that's our short kind of sweet kind of overview of metrics that matter today, and it's all about the impact. I hope you enjoyed the session with Sara and I today, and I've got one last question for all of you, which is if you can give one word of feedback on what you thought of today's presentation. So thank you very much, and Sara.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Janet. What questions do people have for Sara and Janet? You can ask in the Q&A.
You never told us people are allowed to ask questions.
So the Q&A feature, if you've got any questions for Sara and Janet, please pop them in there.
I'm not sure what it'll do to the, I'll read them out and I'll put the slides up later so that if anyone wants to go through them again. So Eddie, the sniff test was, will these metrics help you understand your users? Do they give you a clearer way to tie what you've done to a measurable outcome? Do they help you to understand where to focus your efforts so you've got a bit more confidence in where you should be kind of spending your time? And do they help you as a team? The most important thing for me isn't just the product person or one person understanding these, they're a team kind of set of metrics for all of you understanding them.
We've got a question from Scott. Should the metrics drive the product strategy or the strategy drive the metrics? Chicken or egg first?
It'll depend. If you've got a new product, you're not going to have any metrics and data in them to track. You're going to have a strategy first. I think it's a bit of both, because if you understand what your business model is, because you mentioned chicken and egg there, if you understand the type of business model that you're in, it'll help you drive some of the strategies. So for instance, in Skyscanner, it was a two-sided marketplace where we have to get consumers and businesses. So you've got kind of an overarching strategy on there of, we can't just focus on just getting businesses first and then get the consumers, because the businesses will only wait for so long until they get value and get consumers. So we have to do a little bit of both. So it's that kind of chicken and egg, but we've got overarching strategies and tried and tested strategies that you can learn from there. So for me, it's a bit of both. But if it's a new product, you're going to have to think about strategy first, because you're not going to have the metrics to know. But having that overview of where you want people to go, so when you start kind of getting people through, you don't focus just on onboarding for too long and forget and not notice you've actually got people kind of forming a habit and a frequency. So you've got that overview there to kind of help you.
Thank you. And maybe time for one more question. How can you achieve balance so metrics do not skew behavior?
Sara, I'm gonna ask you that one, since you had the example of where you did skew your behavior because of the metrics.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to answer that. I think ultimately your metrics should relate back to your overall goals or your OKRs for your whole division. So I guess the metrics are leading to the ultimate goal. So for example, you want to make sure that ultimately your metrics are leading to the ultimate goal of driving someone's attention or the transaction. So for example, at Ocado, we'd be looking for basket value, because ultimately we want to be making revenue, and we want to be increasing revenue for our retailers as well. So your metrics should be ultimately leading to your goals, whereas click-through rate isn't going to lead to any goals because it's not increasing the value of your basket, it's not increasing products being added to your basket, and it's not increasing any transaction value either. So yeah, that's how I'd say.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd add to that as well is then it's having the balancing things of the things that shouldn't go down because of what you're doing. So you might decide that you need to kind of get more people kind of in, you want to acquire more new users, but not to the detriment of your click-through rate or your conversion rate. So having the other metrics to make sure that they're not adversely affected to help balance things out makes a big difference.
Okay, have we got time for one more question? There's an interesting one came in just at the end. So some products, for example, internal JP Morgan products, can struggle to assign dollar values to customer value. What's your approach or approaches for customer value that's not financial?
It's an interesting one. It depends on the product. So if I think about our kind of B2E products in JP Morgan, so things like even the phone book. So finding someone JP Morgan when there's 250,000 employees, you can't just sometimes type a name in and the person comes up. You get 27 different people with the same name, and it's really hard to navigate that. So it's hard to assign a dollar value, but people's time has value, and I think you could evaluate the time it's taking there and just assign a value of cost to people's time. And that's really what it is, because it's not about making money with that tool, but it comes down to that productivity space. So really valuing our employees' time and making best use of it, so you can kind of assign what it's costing you to not give them the right answer, if you know what I mean, by a dollar value. In that sense, it's not really about making money.
Super, thank you very much.